When I lead a trip to Israel, the tour guide does the talking, with one exception. When we arrive at Mount Herzl, Israel's national cemetery, I take over. I don't use a script as I give the tour of Mount Herzl, and tonight's sermon is trapped in my computer at home. So I'm going to conduct your tour of Mount Herzl this evening without a script. First, we come to the grave of Theodor Herzl, who's described in the Israeli Declaration of Independence as the spiritual father of the Jewish state. Herzl didn't originate the modern idea of Zionism, but he did bring people together to make that vision a reality. Herzl visited Palestine as it was known then, but he died at the age of 44 in 1904. He was buried in Vienna, and only in 1949 were his mortal remains brought to their final resting place atop the mountain that would bear his name. Theodor Herzl was not a religious man. Unlike Abraham, and by extension Sarah, he did not receive a divine call. Lech lecha me'artzecha mimoladetcha u'mibeit avicha. Get up and go from your land, from your native place, from your parents' house, and go to the land that I will show you. Our rabbinic sages wonder about the apparent redundancy. Abraham and Sarah's land, their native place, their ancestral home, it's all one place. So why say it three different ways? Nachmanides, known as Ramban, explains that that's done in order to credit Abraham and Sarah with the tremendous sacrifice they make, leaving everyone and everything they know to follow the one God. Herzl, too, left everything he knew, even though he never left Europe for good. He left and sacrificed the idea that Jewish life in Europe could improve and be safe. He left a successful career as a journalist to lead the Zionist movement. And many say he sacrificed his health, that his tireless passion for the Zionist cause led to his untimely death. Herzl's sacrifice is honored at his grave. We walk a little further and we reach the burial places of the deceased presidents and prime ministers of Israel. We approach the grave of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Rabin was born in Israel. He didn't leave another place to come to the Jewish state. He was born there before it was a state. He was a soldier in defense of Israel in the Haganah, the paramilitary defense force that protected the Zionist establishments in Palestine before there was a state. And then as soon as the state was established, he adopted as his mission the belief that peace could only come to Israel and to the Middle East if Israel was militarily strong enough to deter any combination of potential enemies in the region. Then, in his second term as Prime Minister of Israel in the 1990s, Rabin left what had become a comfortable place for himself, the place of being the force behind a strong Israeli military, and he took a chance for peace. So many of us remember that extraordinary and dramatic day in 1993 when Rabin stood on the White House lawn with President Clinton, with Yasser Arafat, his longtime adversary, terrorist, murderer of our people. And President Clinton brought Prime Minister Rabin and Arafat together, more or less forcing them to shake hands. Rabin might not have loved shaking hands with Arafat, but he did believe in his mission now to make peace, not with greater military strength alone, but with a solution to the national aspirations of the Palestinian people in a two-state solution. Now, some might say that that was a naive dream that could never have come to be, but we will never know. Rabin went to a peace rally. The anniversary was yesterday on the Hebrew calendar. In the first week of November in 1995, and after a song for peace, as the demonstration for peace was ending, Rabin actually was afraid to go, not because he thought he'd be murdered, but because he was afraid there wasn't going to be enough of a crowd. Turned out there were more than 100,000 people there. And yet, as he was taken from the stage, he was murdered by a Jewish extremist. That extremist sits in prison in Israel to this day, and he proclaims to anyone who will stand still that he succeeded, not only in murdering the prime minister, but in killing the Oslo peace process. That extremist is proud of what he did. Rabin sacrificed his life for the dream of peace. Now, this tour isn't chronological. In fact, sometimes it goes backwards because it's a tour through a physical place. And the next place that's a few steps away from the graves of the presidents and prime ministers is one where there are 7 memorials arranged in the shape of a parachute. There are 3 graves there and 4 markers for martyrs whose remains were never recovered. Those 7 were among some 250 who were recruited by the Zionist leadership in Palestine during World War II and by the British Army, trained by the British Army, to parachute behind enemy lines into Nazi-held territory in places where these young adults who had immigrated from Europe were familiar with because they came from those places. Their mission was to save Allied captives and to provide intelligence. And maybe it wasn't the British Army's mission, but for some, the mission, particularly in Hungary, was to warn Hungarian Jews about the Holocaust. You see, the Holocaust came late to Hungary. It wasn't always well organized, and escaping was possible for some. And so Hannah Senesh, the poet, was among those who parachuted into Hungary, were captured and killed by the Nazis. We will sing Senesh's words a little bit later when we remember our beloved dead. But I'd like to cite another of her poems now as we on our virtual tour stand around the graves of these martyrs to save the Jewish people, these young people who gave up their lives in their youth to save their people. We recall Hannah Senesh's words, Eli, Eli, O God, my God, I pray that these things never end, the sand and the sea, the crash of the heavens, the rush of the water, the prayer of the heart. And now we'll go to our final stop, which is the burial place of those who fell in Israel's War of Independence. This time, though, I'm not going to tell you a story about 1948, about those warriors who are buried there, but instead a story from 40 years later, from 1988, 35 years ago now. In 1988, I was the senior leader of a group of teens from Texas and Oklahoma traveling to Israel for 6 weeks with the North American Federation of Temple Youth, NIFTY. I was giving them this tour in the cemetery. And there we are next to the graves of those who fell in the War of Independence. And I'm translating what's written on the graves for them. Born in Poland, fell in the War of Independence, age 19. Born in Romania, fell in the War of Independence, age 17. Born in Lech, fell in the War of Independence, age 21. But I told you I was going to tell you a story about 1988, not 1948. So I'm reading these grave markers to the teens, when all of a sudden I notice that one of the 16-year-olds, a boy named Sasha, is sobbing. I went to him, tried to calm him, and once I did, I understood why. He said they sacrificed for me. Because of their sacrifice, I can live freely in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Because of them, I can live proudly as a Jew. Today, our people in Israel are sacrificing once again. And of course, those who were brutally murdered and captured on October 7th did not make those sacrifices by choice, though they lived where they lived by choice. This morning, I messaged my sister-in-law, Karen, in northern Israel, and her younger daughter, my niece, Hannah. In particular, I'm thinking of Hannah and her family because her husband, Dvir, has been called up to reserve duty and is very much in harm's way. Karen responded by sending me a picture of Hannah together with Hannah's older sister, Ruth, also my niece, who with both of their families are visiting Karen, their mother, and father, Todd, at Shorashim in the north this Shabbat. It's no doubt a necessary and appreciated respite for Hannah. And she's smiling. Perhaps the smile is forced. But I want to tell you about Hannah. She's sacrificing, taking care of her kids all by herself while her husband is deployed. But so much more, they're not stopping there. Hannah and other residents of Kibbutz Glil Yam, where she lives, have taken in dozens, if not hundreds, of evacuees from the Gaza envelope, which has been evacuated by the Israel Defense Forces. They're feeding and housing them, seeing to their every need. Even at a time of their own loss, of their own fear, these members of Glil Yam are sacrificing for the welfare of their nation and their people. Our prayer, certainly their prayer, is that their sacrifice, like the sacrifices of those whom we've seen on our tour of Mount Herzl today, like the sacrifices of Abraham and Sarah, will be for blessing. Amen.